Okay, so today we're doing Parshat Tzav, which, come on, let's be honest, we always try to avoid such Parshat, but we're not avoiding it. We're going a deep dive into Korbanot. I know the problem. The problem is that this is a foreign world. It's one that we don't even begin to understand what it is that we're supposed to understand, and it's just so mysterious, and we're going to make some sense out of this world today. And you're going to walk out of this understanding, hopefully at least something. So let me begin. Zot Tarat Zevach HaShlamim. So the first korban that we're going to discuss today is a korban which is called a shlamim. So what is a shlamim? So first of all, what is it not? Okay, it's not a korban olah, which completely is a burnt offering going to God. It's not a korban chatat, which is a sin offering. It's not a korban for shkaga. It is not a one where there may be an olah v'yored. It is a korban, which, as it sounds like, it's a peace offering, shlamim, in order to create peace between man and God. So right there, what it means is that there is not, and I'm going to be very careful now, not necessarily anything wrong which I did, which therefore is going to generate an obligation to bring this korban. Quite the opposite. There's no obligation. So here we're dealing with a korban with no obligation whatsoever. Well, and I want to be careful. Apparently no obligation, but I'm going to have to qualify that as we move on. V'zot Torat Zevach HaShlamim asher yakriv LaHashem. Im al Todah yakrivenu. Now I have to back up to what I just now said, or qualify. If you're bringing it because you want to say thank you, it's a korban Todah, which means, why are you bringing this korban? Now, the only question is, right, as of this point will be obligation. Soon we'll see that there may very well be something that will obligate it. But as of this point, why you bring the korban Todah? Because something good happened. What could happen? Take your pick. What good thing do you want in your life? You got accepted to the school that you wanted to get accepted to. You won the lottery, right? Your stock just now went all the way up. Again, you choose the good thing that happened to you into your life, right? Anyone else? Anything else? You had a great Purim. Something happened in your life that you want to express thank you. So, by the way, as of this point, we don't know what that thing could be, and if it's obligation, not obligation, but it's im al todah yakrivenu v'rekriv al zevach hatodah chalot matzot blulot bashemen v'rikikei matzot mishuchim bashemen v'solet mirubechet chalot blulot bashemen al chalot lechem chametz yakriv korbano. Al zevach todah shlamav. Now, if you didn't get it, there's lots and lots and lots of flour being used in various ways. I'm actually going to make this a little bit easier for you. This is what it looks like, more or less. This is the artist's rendition of the various things that we just now read. So you're going to have these and these and these and these. Now, some of them actually could look like most of the things used in the Beit HaMikdash, which will be things which will not be chametz, but you do have those chalot chametz over there that very much look like rolls. Now, if you're wondering why they look like rolls, because it just now said that that's part of what you have to bring. And if you want to read that pasuk again, or two psukim, Ben Yud Gimel, but Yud Gimel said al chalot lechem chametz akriva korbano. So that's why you had some chametz there. Al zevach todah shlamav, which means that this korban needs to be brought together with these chalot, these pitot, these matzot, whatever you want to call them, go together with the korban Todah. Continue. Pasuk Yudalad. V'krimenu achad mikol korban trumat laHashem lakohen azorek et adam hashlamim lo yeh. Pasuk Tedvav. Ubesar zevach todat shlamav biyom korbano ye'achel lo yaniach mimenu ad boker. And when the day that you bring the korban, that is the day that you need to eat this, and you're not supposed to leave anything over until the morning. So I just, again, want to pause for a moment. When you're looking at korbanot, one of the things you should be looking for is what kind of animal. First question will be big animal, small animal, bakar or tzon. Second question you should be looking at, are you dealing with a male, or are you dealing with a female in terms of the obligation? I'm not even saying what all this means right now. I'm just trying to make sense out of total chaos and disorder and not understanding this world, is that if you want to sound intelligent when somebody starts discussing korban, by the way, the other things then, sprinkling the blood, which mizbeach are we talking about? Inner mizbeach, outer mizbeach. So these essentially are going to be the moving parts in terms of any kind of a korban. And then the other thing will be, does the korban have anything that is brought with it? And in this case, the answer is yes. We see that there are various things made out of flour which are going to be brought with it. So essentially male, female, big, small, and so on. So over here, what we know as of this point, it is brought with something else. Where also the other question will be, is it eaten or not eaten? If it is eaten, who eats it? Just for example, a korban chatat is not eaten by the person who brought the chatat, rather it's eaten by the kohen. A korban olah, on the other hand, nobody eats it, as the word olah is completely a burnt offering. So again, I'm going to say that even though when we enter into this world of korbanot, it's very, very daunting. We say, I just have no idea, no understanding whatsoever what's going on. That's why I want to begin to try to break things down a little bit. Then it says in Pasuk Tet Zayin, V'im neder onidava zevach korbano. So let's pause right there. Previously, im al Todah yakrivenu. If you're bringing it as a Thanksgiving offering. Okay, now we have a word to put with this. You have a type of a korban shlamim, which a korban shlamim is also, they have shalom, right? Peace between us and God. So you could have a korban shlamim, which is a peace offering because it's a Thanksgiving offering, right? A Thanksgiving peace offering could be one type, but now we're told there's another type. V'im neder onidava zavach korbano. But on the other hand, what if you're bringing it because you made a vow, or you just said, I want to give a donation. I feel like I want to give a donation to the Beit HaMikdash. I want to bring this offering. Here's the difference. You're allowed to eat it on the day that it was brought, and you can eat it again on the next day. So generally, a regular korban shlamim is eaten for 2 days and one night. One day, night, next day. That means 2 days and one night. So, but again, why will this be important? Well, it may be important how big the animal is and how much food, and also how much quote unquote bread is brought with it. Pasuk Yud Zayin, v'hanotar b'basar zavach b'yom hashlishi b'eish yisaref, and anything left over on the third day, it gets burnt. And then it talks about the sin that may be involved afterwards of leaving meat furthermore, but essentially we have, as of this point, two types of shlamim, one a Todah and one a neder or nidava. Good? Good. And I know that in a certain sense, part of the mystery over here will be, why are we bringing korbanot? And I had thoughts about talking about that more, and I'm actually going to stay away from that as much as possible. I will point out that early on in human history, and this is not the earliest, we do have a korban olah, which is brought by Noach after the flood. But by the way, you could have also said maybe you should bring a korban Todah because he survived. He brings a korban olah after the flood, and what's more important to me is the divine response. V'yarach Hashem et reach anichoach. God then somehow smells and appreciates the pleasant smell. V'yom Hashem et libo, and God says, Lo osif l'kalel odat adama b'avor adam. I'm not going to do this kind of cursing the earth because of man. Because man basically has this terrible yetzer hara. Ki yetzer lev adam rami nu'urav. From the very beginning, man has this terrible yetzer hara. Lo osif od lakot et kol chai kasher asiti. I'm not going to strike all of creation like I've done previously. I'm not going to use this as the reason. So it's interesting that he brings a korban olah, and there's some kind of response to it, which means, quote unquote, it works. So I know that what I just now did is maybe not necessarily connected, but maybe that's part of the hope. Then whenever you bring a korban, even if you were not necessarily obligated to bring it, maybe it brings some kind of divine response. Maybe something happens. So let's go now back to the beginning of Vayikra, because that's when it starts off telling us about our korbanot. Very beginning, it starts off with Adam, Pasuk Bet, Adam ki akriv mikem korban l'Hashem min ha-behema, min ha-bakar u'min ha-tzon. Again, that's one of the things I told you to pay attention to. Bakar are going to be big animals. Tzon are going to be the small animals. Im olah, if you're going to bring a korban olah, min ha-bakar, zachar tamim. A korban olah, now you learn, also needs to be from a male. That's what a korban olah needs to be, from the male, from the bakar. But, as we continue, it will tell us in Pasuk Yud, Ve'im minatzon korbano minaksavemu minayizim lo la zachar tamim. Which means the thing about a korbanola, you could choose a big animal, you could choose a small animal, you can make a burnt offering, anything that you want, but a korbanola really always is a male, and that's the only thing which stays with it. And as we continue, we're actually told that source 4, Parak Bet, v'nefesh kitri korban minchat la'Hashem sol yeh korbano. You can also end up bringing things which are not necessarily even an animal. You can bring things made out of solet. You can bring things which are made out of things which grow as a korban, and it does not have to be an animal whatsoever. So let's a grain. Yeah, you can bring a grain offering as well. And then the continuation in Parak Bet actually mentions one more thing. The im takriv minchat bikurim laHashem. So this is a mincha, which means it's not from an animal, but it's bikurim. Okay, well, let's make this easier. Bikurim laHashem will bring borat, most likely, on Chag HaBikurim. Then it says aviv, which is a really interesting word. It's grain which grows in the spring. Don't get fooled by it. Aviv, kalui ba'esh, geres karmel takrivet minchat bikurecha. So you're going to take the new grain and you're going to burn the grain, and the grain is going to be put as an offering. So again, just in case you think that this whole world of korbanot is uniquely a world that only deals with killing animals and that's all that's going on all day is that killing animals, no, there are other types of offerings and gestures, religious gestures, which are taking place, and I hope that's good. Again, last week, it told us also about the korban shlamim, and it adds a little bit more that we did not know when we picked it up this week, and that's source 5. Ve'im zevach shlamim korbano, im min abakar hu makriv, im zachar, im nekeva, tamim, yakirenu le'Hashem. And then afterwards it will go on to say, what it means is that when you bring a shlamim, which is essentially to a great part voluntary, then if you're bringing from the bakar, which means large animals like a cow, you could do zachar and nekeva, which means when it comes to the voluntary offering, it's less rigid in terms of what you need to do. If it's a korban chatat, again, it has to be in a certain way. Korban olah has to be a certain way. But here, you're volunteering, and you're volunteering to do what it is that you want to do, and therefore there is a possibility of having a larger animal. We'll talk about the implications of that in a moment. In source number 6, which is back in Parshat Tzav, but I will go back and say that the korban shlamim does not have to be. It's im min bakar. You could choose to use smaller animals as well. But what it does say at the very end over here is that this will then create reach nichoach l'Hashem. That this divine response. In source number 6, v'zot TORAH mincha. So the mincha is dealing with, again, grain offerings. And that also creates, if you look at the end of Pasuk Chet, reach nichoach askarata l'Hashem. But, and here's the thing which is interesting, v'hanotera imen yochal aronu vanav, by the korban mincha, it's eaten by the kohanim. Matzot teachel b'makom kadosh, other thing is where it needs to be eaten. B'chatzar omod yochlu, lo ta'afeh chametz chalcham, natati otam ishai, kodesh koshim ki chatat rucha hasham. Which just now created another principle, and that is that the various korbanot, mincha, and so on, are not supposed to be chametz. So it's at this point that, again, I don't want to go any further here because I know that we're already getting close to complete confusion because we already have contradictions now. There are some korbanot that have rules in terms of it has to be male or it has to be female. There are some that have to be eaten by the Kohen, eaten by the person. So when it comes to the korban shlamim, there really is the most leeway. 2 types of shlamim. One is the Todah, one is for a vow. That could be either male or female animal. That could be big animals, it could be small animals. But it was something else that we learned just now, but it needs lots and lots and lots of bread together with the Todah, and that we were told specifically with the korban shlamim, which is a Todah, lots and lots of bread. And there's going to be a problem over here. Because the other thing, which, again, you should have been paying attention to, is the amount of time that you have to eat it. When it comes to the other type of shlamim, it could be eaten for the day, the night, and the next day. So you have 2 days and a night. But when it comes to the korban Todah, then we're limited. It has to be eaten only on that day. Good. And now we know everything that we need to know. Rabbi B'chaye, in source number 7, breaks it down gives us information and is going to give us a way to proceed and understand this. V'zot Torah zevach hashlamim, which means this is back where we began. Korban zeh shnei minim, the two types of shlamim, Todah u'shlamim. One is because something happened that you want to say thank you, and the other one is purely out of this motivation that I want to reach out to God. Korban, right? There's always this gesture between man and God where sometimes something comes from above and then we respond, sometimes that we reach out from below. So it sounds as if the Korban Todah is that I discern that something came down from heaven and I want to thank God for this. On the other hand, the Korban Shlamim is man, it's essentially, Korban Todah would be that man discerns that God has done something in my life of significance, and now I want to respond in a religiously appropriate way. On the other hand, the Korban Shlamim is that I am reaching out to God, and of course I want some kind of divine blessing, abundance, and so on in my life, but it's really my reaching up without anything having happened perhaps yet. So it's almost like there are two types of shlamim. One is anticipation of something good we'll do the other way around. One is because something good really happened and I want to say thank you, and the other is an anticipation and hope that something good is going to happen. Did that make that a little bit easier? The Todah is one type of the shlamim. That was that first type that can only, and that's the other distinction. When I want something good to happen and I'm reaching out, there's no obligation, then I can eat the korban day, night, and day, 2 days and a night. But when it's thanks for something which has happened, then I can only eat it that day. So now, of course, you should all be asking me by this point, so why is there a difference? They're both the Korban Shlamim, which means all of these rules about the Korbanot are difficult enough as it is, so why in the world are we making, why is God making all of these rules? And that's really what Rabbeinu Bechaye is addressing, because what he's going to try to do now is to distinguish between those two types of Korban Shlamim. The type where something good has happened versus the one where I want something good to happen. Korban zeh shnei minim, Todah u'shlamim. Korban Todah haya mevi imo lechem, matzah, chametz, vayu 40 chalot, 10 shel matzah, ve10 shel chametz, ve10 shel rikikim, ve10 shel rivuchin. So again, I can show you the pictures of all that. That was a lot, and that was really a great deal of bread. Now just think for a second, you also have a korban, and you only have this 1 day to eat it, and you have a lot of bread, which means theoretically you could be making 40 sandwiches, right, it depends on how big that animal was. Which means if you actually brought a bakar, you brought a cow, how are you finishing that cow and all that bread in 1 day? So one guy brings a korban, so now you realize maybe it would make some sense to bring something which is somewhat smaller because it can only be in that day. Anything left over, then we have all those rules that it becomes whatever. So perfect. So therefore, which now you realize that's exactly where the Rabbeinu Bechaye is going with this. And he says, look at the enormous amount of bread that you have over here. And so on and so forth. And he says, you end up having 30 types of matzah and another 10, whole pile of chametz, which, by the way, the chametz is really interesting. What in the world the chametz and the matzah are doing over here. And we're going to skip a little bit. Mashayah makriv lechem chametz bekorban todah v'lo amra todah ki kol so'or v'kol dvash lo taktirenu. Don't we have a principle that you don't bring as part of a korban, you don't bring chametz? He goes, no, it's different, and this is like really, we're getting technical now. The problem with having a korban which is chametz is actually putting it on the mizbeach, but not over here having it as part of the rules together with the korban. So yes, we are getting hyper technical in all of this. Is there anything else that we want to know about all this? Maybe just the Sforno first. Maybe this will help us. The Sforno, also on that pasuk, right? Zevach hashlamim, v'odia she'afal pi shekol hashlamim kodshim kalim. All of the, again, kodshim kalim as opposed to kodshim. Mikol makom yesh chaluk b'neim she'im him al odat hoda'ah. Right? We all know this already. By the way, don't you feel good about this? You already know what he's going to say next. There's the distinction between the different types of shlamim. The ones which are for thanks, those are going to come with a lot of bread, including chametz. The one, on the other hand, which is going to come because I want something good to happen, future-oriented. That, on the other hand, is not going to come with chametz. So let's read this Sforno again now. She'im al dot hoda'ah, if you're doing it because you want to be thankful, ye'imam latet betocho min chametz. Then you have to put chametz there. Ki amnam sibah hasakana asher aleh hoda'ah hu sa'or shebe'isa. The danger is always the sa'or shebe'isa. Do you guys have any idea what the sa'or shebe'isa? This is so famous, this term. Actually, the idea, not the term. The idea is famous, the term you have no idea what he's talking about. He goes, the problem is the Sa'or Shebe'isa. Now, the truth is, we're going to come back to this for in a second. The truth is, it's a total metaphor, which he's using, and the metaphor is found in the Gemara in Brachot. The Gemara says, in Brach, which is down over here in 14. This is the prayer, Ika di Amrei, some would say, Ha Rav Hamnuna Matzlila. This is what Rav Hamnuna would say, Rabbi Alexandi Batu Matzli Amarachi. And this is what Rabbi Alexander would say after he finished davening. You know, at the end of davening, let's say, you have the Elokai Nitzor, when in davening, I mean the Amidah. So this is what he would say at the end of davening. Ribon Ha'olamim, Master of all worlds. Galui v'yadu lefanecha, it's revealed and known to you. Sheritzonenu lasot ritzonach, our desire is to do your desire. Umi ma'akev, what holds us back from serving you properly? So what is it? So'or shebe'isa v'shibud malchiot. Now what exactly is So'or shebe'isa? Yesterday in our class on Gemara, Jacob, that what exactly is So'or? So'or is, normally we translate it as yeast. By the way, almost all yeast which is used today is not real yeast. Real yeast, as Torah level yeast, would be something which we would generally call today sourdough, and then you can explore what could be the connection between so'or versus sourdough, which means what you can't have on Pesach is chametz, and so'or is a chametzing agent. It's something which turns something into chametz. So if you have, flour, water, and then you throw in sourdough, you turn this into chametz. So over here it's saying, what is it? We want to serve you, God. What holds us back? So'or shebe'isa. That somebody threw some sourdough into the isa. Now, as I told you, that's a metaphor. Into the dough. So'or shebe'isa v'shibud malchiot. And the fact that we're controlled by other kings. May it be God's will, your will. Save us from them. And let us serve you with a complete heart. Now, what in the world is this prayer that he would say every day? Rashi notes, now, why do we keep messing up and not doing your will? So'or shebe'isa, therefore, is a metaphor for Yetzer Hara shebelibenu hamach mitzenu. That's really interesting. Hamach mitzenu. It turns things into chametz. Essentially, what did the Gemara just now do? It turned chametz into a metaphor and a symbol of the Yetzer Hara, which of course creates huge questions. By the way, this is a really interesting thing in terms of Jewish theology, the various opinions who are going to make a move and change the concept of looking for chametz, searching for chametz, possessing chametz, eating chametz, from being something which is purely God said, and I don't need to question why, into a spiritual struggle for me to rid the world of evil and rid my house or my heart or my home of all kinds of Yetzer Hara, which means chametz becomes a symbol for Yetzer Hara. Now that's really interesting. By the way, the term used over here is machmitzah, the thing which spoils things, and it causes you to miss opportunities and so on. So essentially, what is this prayer? The prayer is, God, I really want to serve you. Why do I keep messing up? And I mess up because of the Yetzer Hara. Why do I have a Yetzer Hara? Because God gave me Yetzer Hara. What is the symbol of the Yetzer Hara? The So'or shebe'isa. But by the way, all of this takes us to really another place, but like one stop before we get to that place. And therefore, it makes a great deal of sense that we don't use any chametz on the Mizbeach in the Beit HaMikdash. Why? The Yetzer Hara, that's not the place. We're trying to rekindle our relationship with God. We're trying to fix the relationship with God. It's no place for the Yetzer Hara. Of course, the obvious problem with all of this is that if, in fact, the chametz is representative of Yetzer Hara, then chametz should never be allowed to be eaten. Right? It should be the same thing as far as we're concerned as pork chops. Right? It's not kosher. Even worse, maybe. Why worse? Because this is the representative for the Yetzer Hara. So how in the world can we ever have it? Now, on top of all that, we now have a problem as well. Why, when bringing the Korban Todah, the Shlamim, which is a Todah, why in that particular offering do we have this combination where we have a lot of things which are matzah, and why is there chametz, which is represented in this. Which means this now, by the way, you see what we just now did? Yeah? Like somehow we're going to get out of all of these technical and boring and things about the korbanot and then realize, no, there's something else which is going on over here. And the korban Todah is one which is going to create a challenge, but it's going to be this combination which is a disturbing combination. So I want to make a suggestion. You ready? Once I make this suggestion now, then something may actually click and something may actually make sense. Everything I've been saying about the Korban Todah should not have been terribly foreign to us. Look at this Sforno in source number 9. That's where we're starting. That's where we went looking for Yitzhahara. Amar v'zotar ad zev shlamim v'odiya she'af al pi she'shlamim kodshim kalam mikol makom yesh l'chok b'neim she'im heim alodot hoda'ah yemom l'teit b'tocho min chametz ki iman sibata sakana asher leah hoda'ah hu sorj v'isa. Which means we're thanking God that we were saved from something. Why were we saved? Because there was something bad there. What represents the bad? The Yetzer Hara is what causes there an ability for something to be bad. Again, that's where we had paused in the Sforno. Mikol makom, mine hamatzot rabot alav. Nonetheless, whenever an individual brings a korban shlamim, which is a todah, or we'll just call it a korban todah, whenever he does that, or he or she does that, there will always be too much food for one person to eat. One person cannot, in one day, eat the korban, the entire thing. Right? What? Umikol makom mine hamatzot rabot alav, uberabot halechem yitparsem hanes la'ochlim rabim. V'kulam ne'achlim bizman kodshei kodshim shayu l'yom v'layla. Al v'kashim shlamim pshutim shelo todah zmanei l'shnei yamim v'layla chad. He essentially just now told us something which is, I think, really interesting. He said, by definition, all of us should understand that there's no way for an individual, I'm repeating myself, to eat the korban shlamim todah with all of the bread involved in it, right? All of this bread, there's no way for one person to eat all of this in one day, and it limited to one day. So it says, why does it limit it to one day? It says because the person has something to be thankful for, something good happened. And therefore, the concept of a korban todah is to bring in as many people as possible that you can tell them the narrative and tell them what happened and tell them how God came into your life and tell them how God saved you and express your appreciation, which means the korban todah has built into it lots of people. Now, by the way, you want to use a current metaphor of this. It means make a kiddush and bring lots and lots of people over there and lots of food, and you're not eating. A Sudan Hodah, of course, is going to come somehow from this. But I'm saying what this foreigner just now did is he looked at all the pieces of information, and he, again, to a very great extent, this korban is an outlier in the sense the amount of time, who's eating it, the amount of time, the amount of bread, and he's saying, look at the obvious. Too much food, too much bread, too much to eat, a person, and too little time. You just take that combination, and he says, well, there's one more element, that this is a korban designed to say thank you. So if you want to say thank you, that means that something happened that you want to say thank you about. And if you want to say thank you, so therefore you're saying that it's a thing to bring as many people as possible to hear that story, to hear how God saved you, so that they can all say, wow, that's incredible, Baruch Hashem, and so on and so forth. That is what the Korban Todah is. Now, are we good till this point? Did everything make sense till this point? Because now we're going to take the jump, okay? Everything here is simple, yeah? Everything really, till this point, was simple. We just made a little order of it. If you want, I'll say it one more time. We have over here all kinds of korbanot, all kinds of rules, all kinds of things, what's brought, who eats it, and so on. Here we have a rule, lots of bread, animal, little time. Put that all together. How do I stop the food from becoming whatever it's called after its time, that I can no longer eat it and it all has to be burnt and so on and so forth? What prevents that? So I invite lots of people to my party. I say, come up, send the invitations, come up to our Rabbi. I'm bringing a Korban Todah. And now part of it becomes, why bring a Korban Todah? Which means there's a story involved in it as well. And I would love to believe, here we're taking the first leap, I would love to believe that people had lots of opportunities to do this. I'd like to believe it. I'd like to believe that lots of people religiously sensitive, religiously inclined, with the Beit HaMikdash as this religious center, not geographical, but religious center of their lives. If something good happened, how do you express it? You go and you say, we're going up, we're going to Harabayit, we're making a trip, we're bringing a Korban Todah, we're going to tell over the story. And that's the kind of thing that you want. You're going to invite everybody, and you're going to show your kids, this is how we say thank you, and God really helped me, this was really unexpected, something really happened, my life was saved, and so on and so forth. And again, I'll say it again, this is how it's done, and I just added one thing along the way. I'd love to believe that this was really a popular Korban. And you know why it should be a popular Korban? Because it's really the happiest Korban that there is. It's one where nobody's telling you have to do anything, and you have to bring lots of people, and it's a party. A Korban Todah, right? Are we there yet now? A Korban Todah is a party. It's a party. You could say, yeah, but still, it's in the Beit HaMikdash, it's not in Tel Aviv, and so on and so forth. And we can continue with the various complaints about it. But no, this is a religious party, and I'll say it one more time. I'd love to believe that people do it a lot. Now, here's the second thing that you need now to realize. The Korban Todah bears incredible resemblance to another Korban that you should know quite well, and that's the Korban Pesach. Of course, there's something missing, but everything else is there. First thing, that as we're looking at Shemot, we're told that everyone should bring a set. By the way, now it goes down to the smaller animal, the smaller type, and that, by the way, is true. Korban Pesach has to be a small animal, which is in its first year, which, by the way, generally means that it's going to be very, very small and very, very young. You don't know this because you're all city folk, yes? That lambs are born only certain times of the year. Did you know this? You don't know about the menstrual cycles of grown... No. It's far more interesting than you would think. But if it had to be in its first year, then it's almost guaranteed that it's not going to be more than a month or so old. Do your research, check up, look about how they grow their lambs and so on. Anyway, it means it's very small. By the way, this thing about not breaking its bones means that you have to eat it also. You have to eat it very fast, but you also have to be careful. Don't just like grab a bone and break it and eat it. It has to be done with a little bit of more, have to take your time. But that itself now becomes really interesting, Beit Avot, Selabayit. And it's really each family then going to gather together. And the reason I know this is because I really try to figure out mathematically how many portions there are in a young lamb that people can eat, how big the group is going to be. And again, my suspicion is it's not all that big, especially when you realize how small the lamb probably is. Set tamim zachar ben shana yelachem min hakvasim imeni izim v'yelachem nishmeret ad arba'asa yom lechodesh hasheni. And then you take it and you put it away. You take it on the 10th of the month, and you put it away till the 14th of the month. V'shechatu oto kol kahal adat Yisrael bein harbayim. And then the offering takes place in the evening of the 14th. V'lachum and Adam, over here they don't have a mizbeach, they put it on the doorpost, and that's part of a whole other story. V'chlu et basar b'layla hazeh, tzli eish umatzot omrim yochlu. You take it and you eat it together with matzah and mar. Now, when I say that, there's something over here about Korban Pesach which reminds me of the Korban Todah, it's that I eat it together with matzah. By the way, there's something missing. And I know what's missing, and I think that you all know what's missing. But there's something else which is missing, but I'll go even further. This is 2/3 or 3/4 of the Korban Todah, because there's something else which happens. And what's that? We tell a story. We tell the narrative. Which means, what was the Korban Todah? The Korban Todah is a Thanksgiving offering. It's a Thanksgiving for something wonderful which has happened. Again, we can discuss the first year of Pesach. That's really interesting. The first Pesach, but every subsequent Pesach, what are we doing? We're thanking God for something really good which has happened to us, and therefore we're taking this animal and then we're eating together with matzah. Should we all admit now what's missing? What's missing is the thing which bothered us in the first place, and what's that? Chametz is what's missing. Because the Korban Todah has matzah and chametz, so where in the world is the chametz? Which means, if you actually understand what I'm saying now, it means that you're with me and you got it. The thing which really should be bothering us, if I'm going to make a comparison between a Korban Pesach and a Korban Todah, the thing which is missing is the thing which never bothered us because it shouldn't be there in the first place, and that's the chametz. Which means, where's the chametz? And your response could be, of course there can't be chametz, there's Pesach, but that's the thing which prevented it from being a Korban Todah. Yes? We're good? Yes? V'lo tatur mimenu ad boker. You can't leave it to the morning, which means it can only be eaten in that one small time period. By the way, you can even argue maybe even it's a smaller time period than a regular korban todah, and eat it quickly, and so on and so forth. And then we're told to get rid of the sa'or, right? Get rid of the chametz, and you can't. And this is moving forward. Pesach Mitzrayim, there wasn't the law of get rid of chametz, but subsequently there is. And I just want to add another thing. Every single time it says in the Torah to eat matzah on Pesach, it also says in either the same verse or the next verse, and don't eat chametz and get rid of chametz, which means it's almost as if that chametz and matzah are two opposite things, which are always said together. And over here as well. Here, eat matzah, but you can't eat chametz, which again, therefore, makes the Korban Todah a little bit more interesting. Source number 10. These are the people who should bring. These are the people who tzrichim lahodot. These are the people in halacha today. This is the person who would say a berchata gomel, right? This is the people. Who are they? Yordei hayam, holchei midbarot, misher cholev v'nitrapeh, umisher chavush bebeit asurim v'yatza. Translate: people who've crossed the sea, people who've wandered in the desert, people who were sick and were healed, and people who were stuck in prison. Now, how many of those would you make an easy argument, when they left Egypt, they're included in this? Right? Again, 3 out of the 4 are really easy. The only one which you can argue is maybe being sick, even though you have a great pasuk that says that after they've learned, Ani Hashem Rofecha, I'm God who healed you, which is also part of leaving Egypt. Essentially, leaving Egypt has all of the elements which should generate a Korban Todah, which now takes me back to my same point. Maybe I really should be looking at the Korban Pesach as a Korban Todah, but of course there's something which is a problem, and there's something which is missing. And what is missing, and what's missing is the chametz. In this Mishnah, in source 11, in Arvei Psachim, has what we call the Manishtana. Now, you may not know this, but the Manishtana, anybody, if they want, you can look this up very easily. The Manishtana, as written in the Mishnah, has another question right after is, there's a question about the Korban Pesach. In all of our, as far as I know, in all of our Haggadot, that question was removed. It was replaced, by the way, with the question about leaning back or not leaning back, which means the real expression of freedom was eating the Korban Pesach. On the other hand, we no longer have a Korban Pesach, so a kid is not going to ask about the Korban Pesach that we no longer have, but that is in the Mishnah in the next line. The reason why I'm stressing it, and as I was reworking all of this in my head as I was driving this morning, I had hoped that I had left that there, because it seems to me very clearly that this Mishnah, this should be obvious, by the way, this Mishnah is a remnant of temple times when the kid is used to eating a korban in the Beit HaMikdash. And he says, why is this one only prepared this way, as opposed to other korbanot? Which leads me to another line in the Manishtana, which I think maybe we don't understand properly. Mozul kol shein v'chana ben shoel in main dat ben aviv malam do manishtan halayla ze mekolot shebakol yod anu achlim chametz umatzah halayla ze kulo matzah. When there's on other nights we eat chametz and matzah, that's not true. We don't eat chametz and matzah on every night. When do you eat chametz and matzah? By a korban todah. Which means if this kid is if this really is a temple-oriented question, and the kid therefore is going to ask about korbanot, because he's asking, hold it, why are we only roasting this as opposed to other korbanot? Which means this clever kid who's asking his questions is asking about the korban Pesach as opposed to other korbanot done in the Beit HaMikdash, and the other usual korban that he would have been a part of and he would have seen would have been the korban Todah. So in a sense, what he's asking, and by the way, I'm really serious about this. I know that this may sound like I'm really serious about this. That so much so that the Korban Pesach, if you lived in a world where the Beit HaMikdash existed, you would know that the Korban Pesach fits into the Korban Todah world. It's a Korban Todah. That's what it looks like. That's what it feels like. What other Korban does the whole family sit around together? What other Korban does everybody sit around and then a story is told? And the story is told how God saved us and how God got involved in our lives. And look at the miraculous things that happened. And what would happen when we would have the Korban Todah? We would eat it together with chametz umatzah. So over here, the kid is looking and saying, hold it a second. On all other nights, we eat chametz umatzah. Why is there no chametz over here? Which means everything I just now said, I really believe is true. but it's so far from us, because all of us have had plenty of starim in our lives. Never occurred to us that's what it may mean, because we live in a world that our Pesach experience is inauthentic in the sense that it's not what it was supposed to be, where the Korban Pesach is in the center. Now, when the Korban Pesach is the center, then he asks, why are we eating this Korban only roasted, as opposed to the way that other Korbanot could be prepared? And why are we eating this, what feels like a Korban Todah, without the bread? What happened to the bread? And then the question becomes a much better question than I think that we ever appreciated. Of course, we then pick it up, we repackage it, and we turn it into a question that exists in a non-Beit HaMikdash world, in a world where we no longer have the Korban. But all that I'm trying to do with this is to push further my stated agenda, and that is to show to what extent that the Korban Pesach really is at least reminiscent, or 2/3 or 3/4, whatever percentage you liked, of a Korban Todah. And of course, we need now to come back to the most obvious thing which is missing, and that is the bread. So let's now try to understand that. When we get to continuation in Vayikra, and that's really interesting that this is still in Vayikra, because Vayikra we would have thought deals with Korbanot and so on. There's a shift that takes place over here in Perek Kaf Gimel, and this is Parshat Emor, and now we're dealing with holidays, right? Elam Modeh Hashem Mikra Kodesh. We're dealing with holidays, and all of these holidays that are going to be mentioned are going to be holidays that have some kind of an agricultural side to them. The Chodesh HaRishon, and that's also interesting. Why is it called Chodesh HaRishon? This should bother everybody. If Rosh Hashanah is in Tishrei, why is Nisan called the Chodesh HaRishon? In what sense is it Chodesh HaRishon? It's the beginning of the agricultural year. It's the springtime. Keep in mind, spring is important. In the Chodesh HaRishon, on the 14th of the month, Pesach LaHashem. And I'm going to say this stronger than you think I'm going to say it. It's not that it happens to be that Pesach comes out in the spring, and therefore we have these various laws, is that God specifically took us out in the spring because it's the spring. Because spring is the beginning. Spring, what you have is that things that looked like it was dead all winter and suddenly comes back to life. The Jewish people may have seemed as if they were dead while they're in Egypt. They're no people. What are you talking about? A people. There's no Jewish people. They're just slaves that we leave and we come back to life just like everything growing comes back to life. That itself is a really important metaphor, but that's part of why specifically we were taken out in the springtime. And it says the 14th is Pesach LaHashem. It goes on to say that it's Chag HaMatzot, right? And as it continues, it says, Pasuk Tet, Yud, Daber B'nai Yisrael, Ki tavo ha'aretz. So again, it just now turned Pesach from an Egypt into an Israel story. And that's really interesting, because you would have or should have said to me, no, leaving Egypt, Pesach is all about Egypt. No. Ki tavo ha'aretz, when you come into the land, Uksartem et ktsira v'veitem et omer reishet ktsirchem el hakohen. And now you're going to bring the beginning of the things which are growing, you're going to bring them, and that's the Omer. V'nifet Omer l'fnei Hashem l'ritzonchem. It then talks about counting 7 weeks, 49 days, until we get to this other holiday. By the way, what does counting do? I'll answer for you. Counting links two things. When I count from one to another, that just linked the two of them. That's what counting accomplishes, which means the counting just now linked Pesach with the next holiday, which is Chag HaBikurim, which means that first we bring the first barley which is growing, and that's going to be the Omer, and then we're going to count 49 days, and then we're going to bring the Bikurim. So let's read this again. Ki tavo la'aretz asher ani noten lachem uktzartem ktsira ve'veitem et omer reishit ktsirchem el hakohen. V'nifet ha'omer, it's going to be lifted up l'fnei Hashem l'ritzonchem. By the way, l'ritzonchem is that same ritzui. It's going to create this kind of divine response. Continue. V'lechem v'kali v'karmel lo tachlo etzer hayom hazeh ad aviachem et korbano elokechem. You're not allowed to eat the new produce which grew in that winter until this korban omer is brought. Which means there is such a thing. If you ever saw this in a bakery, a kosher bakery, it said, oh, we only serve yashan, right? What does it mean yashan? It's actually a Torah law, which is you can't use the new crop until after the Omer was brought, or theoretically could have been brought, which means it can't be done until the 16th day of Nisan. And this is a total spring concept. And by the way, now you realize that also the Korban itself is a spring concept. The Korban's a spring concept. and the Omer is a spring concept, which of course now you realize something else. The matzah is also a spring, but the matzah has to be from the end of the previous crop because we're about to get a new crop which is about to grow. Let's continue. Usfartin lochem, you're going to count, ad machot Shabbat, and so on, and you're going to bring this offering, and so on and so forth. And then, Pasuk Yutet, Sirizim Achad Lechatat, Sirizim, and so on. V'inifa kodem oto alechem habikurim. When it comes to the bikurim, then you bring lechem. So why was I working so hard? In order to try to show that if you realize that the counting creates something, by the way, the person who really explains this a lot is the Ramban, but he doesn't say it exactly the way that I just now said it. What the Ramban says is that Pesach to Shavuot is kind of like the Chol HaMoed of Sukkot. And the 7 weeks are like the 7 days, and then you have the 8th day is Shmini Atzeret, and here the 8th is the holiday of Atzeret or Bikurim or Shavuot, but essentially what he does is he creates a complete linkage between Pesach and Bikurim. But the other thing, which is that word that I hope that you just now noticed, is that you're bringing lechem, which means what were we searching for in terms of Pesach and the Korban Todah? We were searching for this element that was missing, and the thing that was missing, of course, was the lechem, and the lechem then shows up on Chag HaShavuot, which itself is also interesting, which means if I still want to argue that there is this Korban Pesach is like a Korban Todah, it's like a Korban Torah that became broken up into two, where most of it is taking place on Pesach, and then it's going to be completed only when I get to Chag HaBikurim. Now, of course, you know that aside from the agricultural, there's also the other part of it, the theological, the Torah part of it, where you have Egypt, and then you have Matan Torah. And over here, you have the spring, and then you have the spring, the things which are growing. And what I'm trying to express is that these are not two separate things, that God took leaving Egypt and places it right on top of the spring time in order that there's going to be this dual aspect and this dual expression of joy, this feeling. It's going to be the farmer after working an entire winter and planting and plowing, suddenly something is growing. That's going to be the feeling of things coming back to life, which means that God is building this incredible background for the Pesach experience. The whole background of the spring is there, which means that when it keeps on telling us, and if you want, we can keep on looking, it says it time after time after time that Pesach is in the springtime, in the Aviv. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these verses, but if you want, we could. But it's time after time after time. It stresses this, that Pesach always has to be in the springtime. Here, source 34. Hayom atem yotzim b'chodesh ha'aviv. Source 35. Right? L'moed chodesh aviv ki vo yatzatem Mitzrayim. V'chag hatzir bikurei b'sadeh. Afterwards, chodesh aviv ki b'chodesh aviv yatzatem Mitzrayim. The emphasis on spring, it's not just in order for us to be reminded, what time of year is Pesach? No. Pesach is a spring holiday, and the idea of the Jews leaving is this idea of coming back to life, sort of like everything happens in Pesach. Now let me go back a second, and there's still this huge problem. The huge problem is, why? Okay, other way around. If bread represents the Yetzer Hara, why is it ever around? So, I'm going to read something to you in the Kli Yakar, which is in source number 13. By the way, the Kli Yakar had a near-death experience, almost died, and he was known as a great darshan. He had the best speeches, the best talks, and when he was sick, we know what his Korban Todah was? Of course, there's no Beit HaMikdash. He lived a couple hundred years ago. He was a rabbi in Prague and a preacher in Prague. He said, God, if I survive, I'm going to publish all my talks so everybody else can use them, so I lose my exclusivity, because that was his. He had all these great ideas, but he would only share them when he would talk. If he publishes them, then he can no longer use them, and everyone else is going to steal his stuff. So he says, I'll publish all of my talks. So he's going to make an argument that it's an inverse relationship of what you think. Chag HaBikurim, with the bread, is the time we get the Torah. Why do we get the Torah? Because we have a Yetzer Hara. If we didn't have a Yetzer Hara, we don't have any need for Torah. Which means, how do we have an ability of facing this world? Only because we have Torah. We only have then rules telling us this is right and this is wrong, and establishing within us a moral compass. Essentially, the Kli Yakar's argument is, he's basing himself on a Gemara in Shabbat, where Moshe goes up to get the Torah, and the angels start to argue with God and say, why are you giving the Torah to him? And God says, talk to him. And Moshe's like completely frightened, and Moshe's, asks God, well, what does it say in it? And then he starts turning on them. He says, okay, you should leave the house. You're leaving Egypt. I'm God who took you out of the house of slavery. Were you slaves? But it goes on. Honor your parents. Do you guys have parents? And he goes, steal. Do you even have a Yetzer Hara, to go and steal things? And it's at that point that they back down and they say, okay, you're right. We're angels. We have to do whatever God says to do. Which means what he's arguing is, why do we celebrate Chag HaShavuot with bread? Because bread represents the Yetzer Hara. And it's only because we have a Yetzer Hara that God gave us the Torah. Is that if we didn't have the Torah, then we would not. Sorry, if we didn't have the Yetzer Hara, we wouldn't need the Torah. We would be perfect beings, just like Malachem, who do whatever we're told. Which means essentially we have a process which is taking place, and it's this process of freedom. Part of freedom is being able to make your own choices. Part of being a slave is not having choices. Leaving Egypt, there's like this Korban Todah aspect of it, in terms of thank you for taking us out of a house of slavery, thank you for taking us out of prison, thank you for helping us cross through the sea, thank you for going through the desert. There's all these reasons to say thank you, but on the other hand, really to have the ability to make choices is based upon the chametz. It's based upon the Yetzer Hara. It's based upon this other aspect to it, and therefore the celebration or the comparison of a Pesach with Korban Todah, it does not get completed until we get to that next stage and we stand by Har Sinai and receive the Torah. If you want, I can now read, if you want to hear the Kli Yakar. Siyom liyom matan Torah ki haTorah tzricha liyot chadasha. 1 second. Vayu b'shtei alechem chametz asher Yetzer Hara nimshal bo ki b'lashon Chazal hu nikra sa'or shebe'isa lefi sheb'makom sheTorah mitzuyim sham ein Yetzer Hara yachol lazik k'mo she'amru Chazal Amar Kodesh Baruch Hu barati Yetzer Hara barati lo tavlin dahainu Torah. I created a Yetzer Hara, but I created the antidote, and the antidote is Torah. The ilmole haYetzer Hara, had it not been that we have a Yetzer Hara, an evil inclination, lo yakodesh baruch hu morida Torah min elyonim. God never would have taken the Torah from the heavens, ela tachlonim, and given us to love. Ki b'ta'ana zu nitzach Moshe Rabbeinu to malachim. That was the clinching argument of Moshe against the angels. Kishamru lefnei Kodesh Baruch Hu chemda gnuza yesh lecha. You have this incredible treasure. You're giving it to man. V'ata rotzeh l'nan lebasar v'dam. You want to give it to people made of flesh and blood. Again, flesh and blood are people who make mistakes, who are very fragile. V'yeshiv Moshe klum yesh Yetzer Hara b'nechem. Do you guys even have a Yetzer Hara? Could you have an ability of making choices? V'ratzalom m'shayot tzarich litei Torah ela tachlonim kidei litei lahem tavlin al Yetzer Hara. Is that the reason we need Torah? Is, of course, we need to be able to deal with our Yetzer Hara. Now, what's interesting is this time then between feeling free and between receiving Torah. Yes? Do you understand why I'm saying that's a problem? Because when you feel completely free, you can make all kinds of choices, and you receive the Torah, then you kind of limit it to what's right. So essentially every year, this time of year, what you're going to have between Pesach and Shavuot is a time of, we call it the Omer, Sfirat HaOmer, counting the Omer. And again, the real counting, as much as people say, it's counted between leaving Egypt and getting by Har Sinai, if at best that's a secondary. At best it's secondary. The real thing is it's something which is completely agricultural. But nonetheless, it's a time which is problematic, and so much so that in Source 16, we're told something which we all know, and that is Rabbi Akiva has 12,000 pairs of students, and when did they die? Kula metu mi Pesach haratzeret. They died during this time, which is really interesting, because then it sounds like they're dying between the time that is the beginning, but till we actually then receive the Yetzer, we receive the Torah and the ability of fighting with the Yetzer Hara. And I just want to focus on that time, and now go to a place which I don't know at all if you would have anticipated this, but if we're talking about the Korban Pesach in a certain sense as the first Korban of OUisrael, this is when we begin. This is when OUisrael begins. This is when we leave Egypt and we start with the Korban Pesach, which is in a certain sense a Korban Todah. I want to go back to the first Korban, which is actually cited in the Torah. I mean, you can argue whether Adam Arishon brought a Korban, but it doesn't say it. The first one who brings a Korban is going to take us back to Perek Daled. Yes, remarkably, we were back in early parts of Bereshit. V'adam yadat chava ishto v'tahar v'teler kayin v'toma kaniti ishet Hashem, which is really interesting because she thinks she has acquired a relationship with God through having this child. V'tosef v'leded et achiv, and then there's kind of like this afterthought, this additional child, Hevel. V'hi Hevel re'atzon v'kainei oved adama. Hevel is a farmer, and Kayin works the ground. V'himikates yamim, and after a period of time, which we're not told how much time, but it's a period of time, v'yavek, which of course now is a question, how much time, v'yavek hayin pri, mi pri ha'adama, he brings from the things which are growing, minchal Hashem, he brings an offering to God. V'hevel avi gamhu, mi b'chorot tzono, mi chavlayim, and he brings from his, now you have to be more careful, Hevel brings mi b'chorot, from his very first, see that's, I always find that interesting, if this is passive aggressive, what does Hevel sacrifice? He sacrifices the firstborn. Now, if you're Cain, how do you relate to that? Right? He sacrifices his first animal. But I don't think that there's anything evil in his mind or in his thoughts. But what it says is he also brings an offering, mi b'chorot sano, from his first, u'michel vehem, from the choicest. And God chose Hevel and his offering. Now, what is interesting about this? One is, who's the originator, the person who first thinks about this idea of offering something to God? That's Cain. What does he bring? So you have to work backwards. What does it say? Mi pri adama, from among the things growing. But what does Hevel? He also brings. What does he do? He brings the best. There is two different approaches to, I would say, religious devotion over here. One person kind of checking the box, and the other person saying, no, I want to do this right. I want to do this in the best way I can possibly do it. And of course, this should not be a surprise that God accepts the offering of Hevel. Cain gets enraged. Cain goes and kills Hevel and says that afterwards, my brother's keeper, and so on. And the answer that God says is, yeah, you're your brother's keeper. So I want to stop with all of this because there is a really interesting subtext to everything that I just now read, which is found in the Midrash. Now, whether you can actually say, oh yeah, I see this in the text, is of no concern to me or not, if you see it or you don't see it. What's much more interesting to me is that the rabbis decided that, oh no, there's a subtext over here, and let's try to understand the subtext. Bereshit Rabbah. Here we start in 21. We start with the argument of Eliezer and Yeshua when the world was created. Again, do we have a Tishrei world or do we have a Nisan world? When's the beginning of the world? Which essentially is, if the beginning is Nisan, so the first fruits and the first everything in Nisan is going to be interesting. But following this up, it says, Manda Amma B'Nisan Nivra Olam, over here. Those who say that the world's created in Nisan, Asa Hevel Kayim min Pesach v'Atzeret. How long did he actually live? He lived from Pesach to Atzeret, and therefore Hevel was Shelo Asa Hevel B'Olam Yoter Mi-50 Yom. That as a total, he was in the world for 50 days. Now, before you ask me, I have no idea what this means. He only lived for 50 days, and he was already working. One's a farmer, and the others work with the animals, and so on. I don't know what this means. What is far more interesting to me is how this midrash took the Cain Hevel story and placed it on the time between Pesach and Atzeret. By the way, that's actually the time that people don't get along with one another. So therefore you say, hold it, where is the really, the beginning, the archetype of the students of Rabbi Akiva not getting along with one another? Oh, look at this. Cain kills Hevel at the same point of the year. So as I said, that to me becomes a bit more interesting. It continues because the word mereshit pri, right? It doesn't say Mereshit Pri. That's what this is pointed out in source 23. And therefore it says, which means if he was going to bring Bikurim, then he should have brought the first. But he doesn't bring the first. He brings the end of the previous crop. He brings whatever has nothing else to do with. If you want, we can be clearer with that. But look at the Midrash HaGadol in source number 24. Kevan Shigia Lel HaPesach Kara Adam Levana V'Amr Lahem Banai B'zeh Hayom Atidin Yisrael Likarev Korban Pesachim Lebaran. And again, it reads the Cain Hevel story as if we're dealing up between Pesach and Shavuot. And it says, yeah, the Jews in the future are going to bring a korban Pesach, so therefore you should bring offerings as well. Now, if you're not getting yet what's going on